In this lesson, I'm going to walk you through a proof of concept. I'm going to show you a technique that I use to learn really complex things really quickly. It's still not easy. I'm not going to lie, it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's the fastest way that I've ever found to learn really difficult sections of songs. And the example I'm going to use is a small section in Legion, which is one of the new songs off of Tesseract's fifth record, The War of Being. And in this song, there's this section where I'm playing the ride, I'm playing this repeating ostinato, and there's another little ostinato happening on the ride. And this didn't exist at all before we went into the studio. The song was previously, it was a demo from the Sonder era of Tesseract that didn't make it onto Sonder because it wasn't finished. First 2 minutes of the song gets quite heavy. The second section just didn't exist at all when we went into the studio. And in fact, the second half of the original demo went into Mirror Image from Sonder. So it was a completely different song. And in the studio, we didn't really know what the second half was going to be. And half of the band were pushing for this song to exist, and another half, including myself, were like, well, it's not a song. What do we do? And we ended up just writing over Mirror Image. The thing that was really difficult is this particular section, I basically hadn't practiced it because I didn't think it was going to be a song in the studio because it wasn't a full song. So I was kind of surprised when I was presented with this challenge. And I didn't think this part would be possible for me to play in such a short amount of time. But what I did is I followed the process that I'm going to show you in a second. I programmed in the drums that I needed to see, which was kick drum, what my right hand was doing, ghost notes and snare drum. And I slowed it right down and I took it a little chunk at a time. I maybe got like the first bar into the second bar, got that feeling good at about half tempo or even slower than that. The crucial part of this is that I programmed the drums back into a computer. I programmed in what I need to see as MIDI, and then I followed it on a big projector in front of me when I was playing. So in the same way that you might consider, traditionally people would read music on a static piece of paper, they'd read it, the transcript in front of them. Think of this as an updated version of that. If you've got the MIDI in front of you, you can reference the dots on a screen really, really easily. And at first it's a little bit complex and you wonder what on earth's going on. But after a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes trying to do something, it starts to make sense. You start to connect what's on the screen with what's got to happen in your mind. In the same way that if you've played games like Guitar Hero or Rock Band, it's the exact same thing. When you see people doing it and it's ridiculous, you've got all these lines and dots scrolling towards you, might seem hard at first, but if you play it a bit, it kind of makes sense. And it's the exact same thing going on here. I'm using the MIDI as the information. It's scrolling across the screen in real time, and I'm doing it in chunks. And I'm learning it slower. Then when I get that bit comfortable, I might speed it up. I might add the next section on. And I'll show you how I set that up in Cubase. And I'm also going to show you for real, because I can't really play this groove very well. I played it in the studio, but I haven't played it since then. I'm going to show you how long it takes me to relearn to play something like this. So you should see down on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, there's a bunch of dots. And what these are the different parts of the kit that I'm going to be hitting. Right at the top, we've got the kick drum. Underneath that, we've got the ghost note, the yellowy color. Then the orangey red is the snare drum accents. And then further down, we've got the ride bell and the ride cymbal. So those two things. And this is how I like to lay it out. I might put the kicks underneath sometimes, so it's kind of, it lower down visually. It's one less thing for my brain to connect. But I like to lay things out in a way that kind of makes sense, and this usually makes sense to me. And I'll just follow this through in Cubase, either one bar at a time or one section at a time. I've looped the first 4 bars for me to begin, and I'm going to just see how this goes. This is down at around half speed. This might be possible. I might have to slow it down further than this, but I'm going to have a crack. You'll see exactly where I begin and how much time it takes me to get to the point where I can play these 4 bars. feel like the basic pattern is coming together. It's difficult, but it always is. I'm going to try speeding it up. I've created different parts, different sections in Cubase that are just different tempos, which makes it a bit easier. I'm ramping it up 20 BPM each time, essentially. As is usually the case, as soon as you've got the basic pattern, everything else tends to speed up. So I feel like I've got this pattern down, at least this bit of it. I'm going to take it to the next speed. Okay, sick. The ghost notes aren't in there yet, but I'm getting there with these 4 bars. Let's take it up another 20 BPM. There's basically 5 steps that I've created here. More progress. Okay, and let's move it over again. This next one, this is 20 BPM below the maximum speed that we're going to play. Okay, it's not impossible at that speed. Bearing in mind, I'm not playing all the ghost notes yet. I'm just getting the ride, kick, and snare accents aligned, and then the rest of the ghost notes I'm going to kind of fill in as it makes sense. I'm going to try and get them as close to the original as possible, because I played the original, so I know it's possible. But I haven't actually played this in about a year now, so it's gone from my brain, which is what happens. But anyway, full speed with the first 4 bars of it, which has taken, 10 minutes? Something like that, which isn't too bad for a pattern that's this complex. So, as always, whenever I'm doing this, it's never too crazy to get it back up to the initial speed. Bearing in mind, I've played this pattern before, so it's not completely alien to me, but I can't just sit down and play it. I need to go through this process to put it back into my brain again. And I did this the evening before we recorded it. I went through this process. I got it to a point that I was fairly pleased with all the way through, and then the next morning I'll spend another 40 minutes maybe. The evening might have been an hour, the next morning might have been 40 minutes to an hour, and then I tracked it. So following this kind of process, getting used to working with MIDI on a screen in front of you, and deciding the loop points that make the most sense for the part that you're trying to learn. You know, it might be up to a snare accent, it might be a bar, it might be a section as you hear it. Define those loop sections, learn them, and what I actually find is that going from a looped section into the next one is more helpful sometimes than just learning the next one. Because if you're learning it halfway through, especially the longer phrases, if you're learning it halfway through, you're starting from a halfway point or at some strange interval, it can be difficult to then tag that on to the thing you've just learned. So there's like another transition you need to learn, which is from the first bit into the second bit. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. You'll witness that yourself as you follow this kind of process. Let's give the final 5 bars a go. This is the second speed that I'm playing at. I'm going to play all 9 bars. It is possible. I can relax. I just got to get the tempo up now. I need to take a break for 2 seconds because my in-ear has stopped working, which generally means I need to go and clean it. So I've got to go and do that, and then I'll get straight back to doing this. I reckon I've been doing this for about 30 minutes, something like that, to get it from a point where I haven't played it in a year, and I kind of know it, but I don't know it, to this stage. In 30 minutes is pretty damn good. Granted, if I don't know the pattern at all, it might take me 2 sessions like this to get something like this down, but you know, that's literally what's happened. I learnt it to record it the evening before in the studio, and I'm going through the same process again now to refamiliarise myself with it so that I can play it on stage in front of you guys without messing it up. So, there. For my next lesson, I'm going to show you how to clean your IEMs. I'm not really, but if you do have IEMs and they're sounding crap, this thing's called a Jodivac, Jodivac. You can get them on the internet, and they're very good. I'm almost there with it. I'm going to step away for a short break, which is what I have to do in sessions like this sometimes because I get physically and mentally exhausted trying to do it. So I'm going to step away and come back to it maybe later today, maybe in 30 minutes time. I will let you know when I come back. Hello and welcome to day 2 of trying to play the hard ride section of Legion. I actually skipped a day. Yesterday I would normally do one practice the day before and then one practice the next day, but yesterday I was very busy putting together a drum lesson for one of my students, so I didn't get my practice session in, but that's not a problem because I'm going to do it today. So I'm going to jump straight back into the session at the maximum speed, at the intended speed of the song, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to play it or if it's going to fall apart, but on the second day, especially if I've had a couple of, if I've had good sleep, that's normally a pretty good indicator of how well the next session is going to go. The knowledge and the memory of the previous session it gets recalled very quickly, and the mystery is kind of gone. There's something that happens that enables me to start at a much faster tempo. Usually, I'm about to play this and it all fall apart, and that'd be a complete lie, but that's generally what happens. Anyway, let me get into it. I'm going to switch over to this view, I'm going to hit play, and you guys are going to get to see if it all falls apart. Alright, so as suspected, I can play it up at tempo, more or less. I'm like 85 to 90% of the way there. The pattern I can play, the precision and the muscle memory and the me getting to that part during a set and it sounding good and not sounding like a mess, I've got to work on that. But the pattern that was previously unplayable and difficult and really like couldn't do it. It wasn't within me. Is now there, and that was one practice session with the pattern up on a screen as the MIDI in front of me, and having a good rest, good sleep, coming back to it 2 days later, granted, but normally it's the next day. But coming back to it with that memory having been really solidified and having another go. And very often I can jump up to the main tempo, up to the desired tempo. Sometimes I have to start, I don't know, 20, 30 BPM back, but it's generally a lot stronger the next day. And while that is my experience, I'm not saying that is exactly what's going to happen for you. But if you turn your practice sessions where you're trying to learn something difficult and new like this, if you take it to the stage of programming it in first, putting it into a computer so that you got the visual reference and get used to that way of working, you will expedite the learning process a massive amount, and you'll begin to accept that as the normal way that you have to do these things, rather than procrastinating on how long this thing is going to take if you just try and listen to it and play along to it and figure it out that way, which is what I used to do, which takes ages, months sometimes, to learn songs like Exile. It took me months to get that down. If I was learning Exile this way, a couple of weeks maybe. So try this out in your own practice. Program something in, follow it on a screen, and start it out at a speed that you need to start it out at. And then once you've got it up to the speed, practice going into that part from the previous part of the song and out into the next part of the song, so that you're not just practicing it in isolation. You want to practice the transitions, because that's where you can often stumble. When you've got this thing just looping around in place, then you're just practicing that section, and there's going to be a switch. There's like a toggle that has to happen between the previous section in this section into the next. So that's the next part of the practice for me, is practicing it with a little bit of a loop beforehand and after. And then I'm just going to practice it within the context of the whole song. So there is a little bit of proof that a slight change to your current system can make a pretty massive impact on how long it doesn't take to learn something difficult.